Yeah, sorry about the crap footage. Look, you can't expect anything less from this two-bit operation. I just came back from the floods. It was devastating. Quick plug, though, we've got a video coming out on Friday about all the fine work that the Animal Rescue Collective does. Long story short, you know what they did in the bushfires. That was your hard-earned cash that saved millions of native animals. This time, it's mostly domestic animals. Unfortunately, most of the native animals drowned. And so, it is devoted to making sure that all the dogs, all the cats, all the chicken, geese, whatever, that don't have a home have been rehoused and are fed during this time of crisis. You go and ask the people there. The things that they only cared about were their pets and their family. Their houses, completely devastated. The main theme was, what about my dog? Where can I put my dog? That's what they wanted. And that's what Animal Rescue Collective does. In a time of crisis, they do incredible work. They're a grassroots organisation. All that money goes to them, the victims, that is. And this is because it's only been around since the dawn of Facebook, I suppose. It's just so quick and efficient now. So any money that you put in, whether it's this disaster or the next, because we are living in the age of climate change, it is going towards being on the ground level before government services are there to make sure that they can do as least damage as possible after the devastation has occurred. Anyway, here's today's video, and I guess I'll see you at regular scheduled programming. Thank you very much. You know how Murdoch's new stance is that acting on climate change will make Australia the Saudi Arabia of the 21st century? Hopefully that means our leaders will take more photos like this in the future. I love you. Problem is, we already knew climate action would make us rich last election when Murdoch was saying it was going to cost us, shock horror, $60 billion. That's about this much of the debt the Liberals got us in, as illustrated by this former Liberal. Well, they should stop adding to the pile, because I've had it enough. With the most beautiful thing in the world apart from the TV channel 7 mate, hindsight, we can now piece together how last election Murdoch sunk valuable time that we needed to get rich in exactly the way that he's advertising now, and it pretty much boils down to giving a lot of airtime to Bill Gates if you look like pedophile Brian Fisher. And I hate it, it's such a trope of comedians. This guy looked like a pedophile. But it's like this man is wearing a Halloween costume of a sex offender. If he dressed as a clown on telly, it'd be less scary. Then again, he'd be stealing Judith Lucy's act. The Liberals and the Murdoch press trotted this clearly very fulfilled man out during his last election to spook Australia about how Labor's climate policy will be like putting a wrecking ball through the economy. They're obsessed with violent tradie analogies, aren't they? It'll be like when you're throwing tiles in a skip bin at 7 in the morning and the economy will be like the neighbour that wants you to keep it down. Labor's balancing of the budget is like when you're on a really long truck haul and you've been eating nothing but meat pies because you can't find a shepherd's pie. You've got to have your veggies. I know these are getting pretty obscure, but we've been doing these since the Howard years and we're running out of ideas as no one in the Liberal Party knows any tradies. The Murdoch press had at their beck and call the entire Australian public service, any economics department in any university in the country, countless private firms, and yet they decided to endlessly highlight the opinions of a man that pretends he's a company, but if you go to his office...
Please don't tell anyone how I live.
Just him! He sold his soul and he doesn't even have a secretary. Or by the looks of him, he might have killed her. The point is, one of his main clients is the Minerals Council, but just to balance that out, Exxon, and the press splayed him all over the front pages like he was as important as the Easter show. I think we know what's going to be in his show bag. As what a surprise, he found that curtailing the profits of the companies he works for could wipe $264 billion from the economy. That's supposedly over the entire economy over 10 years, by the way, which, to put that in perspective, 10 years from now you're going to be so old that you'll unironically enjoy the show Grand Designs, not to mention in the same time period the Liberals will spend $290 billion on fossil fuel subsidies. Not from the wider economy like Brian pulls his $264 billion from. The budget. You will directly be paying for that. Imagine how many toothpick Pepsi umbrellas you could buy to recreate a model Bangladeshi market and then chuck in a fish tank to recreate what's going to happen to Bangladesh because of that. But tradies, hold on to your hard hats. That's not even the worst because according to Fisher,
That's the minimum hit the economy would take under Labor's climate madness. It could have cost us as much as $542 billion. Oh my God, that's still all. Especially when in his report, there is a study that estimated that the cost of doing nothing would be $110 billion a year. Let me do the maths because I know that as soon as I said maths, you thought, maths? Is he going to start reviewing maths again? Even if it did end up costing the worst, most alarmist number this man could possibly imagine, he's still saying that if we don't switch over to renewables, it'll cost us more in half the time anyway. Isn't that phenomenal? A bought and sold economist of the Minerals Council offered more scrutiny of himself than the press. Doesn't this sum up your face right now? No? Does this sum up your face? To get to the estimate that Labor's climate plan would cost Australia $500 billion, Brian Fisher, this is incredible, he had to estimate that renewables would cost 3 times as much as they currently do 10 years from now. In the last 10 years, the price of renewables dropped by 80%. They're the cheapest source of energy now. What were his assumptions? Predicting COVID would happen and our recovery program would be based off of turning Australia into a giant 1600s French-themed tourist park and we'd all start making turbines out of cobblestone? That wouldn't happen. Australian workers wouldn't have the work ethic for that. They don't even have the work ethic to pretend that they're working. He also settled on this very definite figure of, I don't know, $250 billion, $500 billion, hard to say, a week before it started getting reported in the press. That's the level of meticulous research the press were feeding the public. Dozens of economic modelling reports to choose from, and yet they went for the Exxon-sponsored cave hermit who crammed. Wow. The Australian really is the Australian, rooting for the underdog. An example of one of these reports that isn't written by someone who works for one of the biggest polluters on Earth and therefore didn't base their modelling off of Bill Shorten building solar panels out of smashed Fabergé eggs was the ACF's report that got next to zero coverage. It was a collection of findings from a bunch of other economists, including the IEA and the Treasury, who found that reducing our carbon footprint from 19 tonnes to 7 tonnes by 2030 wouldn't cost the country $542 billion. It would save it $650 billion. That's without factoring bushfires, droughts, floods, as those have always happened and aren't magnified because of increased carbon in the atmosphere, as shown by the peer-reviewed work of Avi Yemeni. It was things we could actually measure, like if we don't put a price on carbon, countries that have emission trading scheme laws will start placing tariffs on us that'll cost $240 billion. Qantas, for example, which I'm sure half of you are so pov you're wondering, what's Qantas, governor? Is that a fancy form of geese? Qantas were facing an initial carbon tax penalty of 15% on its carbon emissions for any flights in and out of Europe, and I'm glad. That's what they get for having only Naruto and Avatar in their anime section. Ah well, I guess the money will be going to people much more in need than Australians. Eurotrash in Mykonos. World Vision needs your support. We won't have to import as much oil if we have electric cars. That's a saving of $181 billion. Households will save $50 billion on energy efficiency. The list goes on, and this isn't the money we'd be making, by the way. This is how much it would cost to do nothing. What? Wasn't published because the assumptions were flawed? Yeah, that's the reason. Economists, by the way, had a little more time to find faults in these publications than a week, just a tad. They had a decade. This was published in 2010. We had known this for nearly 10 years by the time they were dangling this corpse all over the information sewer that is this country's press, and yet the report, along with many, many others, got zero coverage. Meaning the press to install Scott Morrison in the last election didn't just exaggerate or omit or even conveniently lie. They told the public the exact opposite of the truth. They knew all along that Labor was right, and yet they lied to you for 15 years in order to keep the party that was right out. Scum. Do you think with a record that self-interested, the press and the Liberals now saying that they're fully on board with net zero is remotely sincere? Especially when Albo's repeatedly pointed out they've offered nothing other than a f***ing headline. The party that made us completely miss our 2020 targets and are lying to you when saying they did. I didn't think you could get any worse than telling the exact opposite of the truth. But these pricks also lie about the exact opposite of something that has already happened. That's why you need to convince at least one person before the election that the coalition and their two proxy parties of One Nation and United Australia are lying to you. Labor is not, and has not for 15 years, while the coalition and the press have put one man's share portfolio above the interests of a country they're supposed to illuminate and lead. A man who's so rich that his no-talent son lives in the most expensive house in America, but not enough apparently. They have to impoverish their homeland by trillions? For what? Where the do you go from there? I love you, man, habibi. Oh, that's right. Well, everyone's got dreams, I guess. Mine is that you sign up to our Patreon so we can expand. As the bigger we get, the more we can counter this shit. And seeing as most elections come down to a handful of seats, the more people that know what's going on, the less of a coin flip they will turn out to be. Like and subscribe.
Please share and comment below. Comment.